All right. Hello and welcome to the Scale Up Leader. Today, we've got an interview with Christian Miccio, who is a product leadership consultant, ex-Google, ex-Shazam, fantastic experiences. I've worked with him a little bit and I'm looking forward to talking to him today. If you have any comments or questions, just stick them on to LinkedIn or YouTube. We should see them if things go well on this system. So feel free to say hi, who you are, where you're from, anything like that, and ask any questions. But otherwise, I'm going to bring Christian on board. Hey, Christian, how you doing?
Good morning, good afternoon. Good. And you?
Yeah, good. Very, very good. Thanks. So we met. I think we met while we were at Google. I was there from 2006 to 2012 or so, and I think you were there. We crossed over. I was in London. You were in Zurich, right?
Yeah, exactly. We'll leave it at a while ago. And yeah, I was coming to London quite a few times for trips, and that's how we met the first time.
Yeah, and then I think
And
after that we had various things. We both did various things. What did you do after Google?
so after Google, I dabbled in startup. So we got some seed fund, didn't make a Series A. I then moved to the payment industry. Did some time in the publishing industry, and I also worked in the telco industry, so in different verticals. And but we met again after a few years on a bike ride,
That's
and
yep.
you remember that? And that was Paris, London tech bikers.
That's right. Paris to London. We rode. For those who don't know, Tech Bikers was started by Easy Vidra. If you know Easy Vidra, in London, he was also an ex-Googler at the time. He ran Google Campus, and now he's a VC. But he set up Tech Bikers to get startup people and VCs riding from Paris to London, raising money for charity. It's 320 kilometers, I think it was, and about 60 or 70 people, and over 3 days. And wow, what a fantastic ride that was! And they had food provided and everything. I mean, neither of us are, and most of the people on there aren't the world's best riders, but we enjoyed it. It was good, it's really good, good ride, wasn't
It was excellent. I mean, it's quite fun to actually talk product, talk shop basically on a bike. There was a group that was faster than me. I know
it?
that.
I know my goal when I joined was basically can I keep up with the last people? That's when I
Yeah.
thought if I can manage to finish this and still walk at the end and have ridden almost all the way and not be last every day, then I'll feel like I've done very well. And then it turned out that actually it was
We did it.
I was the kind of in the middle of the pack and it was all right. And I felt like I was going to be like the slowest person there, and I wasn't. I ended up with the nickname Richard the Rocket because every time I went down a hill, my mass would carry me faster and faster, and I'd pass everyone. And then up the
Uh,
hill, they'd go past me. But we rode together for probably most of one day. I think it was on the second day through
yeah,
the countryside,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
really good.
I know where I'll trail next time.
Yeah. And we should hopefully that's happening again probably next year. We'll see how it goes. I think they're
Yep.
not doing it this year, but next year
Yeah,
we
fingers
managed to.
crossed.
So, what are you doing now, Christian? You're a product consultant. We've worked together on a client or two, and we've talked about stuff. But just for the sake of the people watching, and we'll have some people live and some people watching this later on. So, but for the sake of people watching, what is it you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, so three years ago, I had this thought that I could help companies with product and with different aspects of product, from team to organizational to impact on the launches, whatever was the company wanted to do to improve, basically. There was a big question for me because I thought, well, I'll probably get the question from companies saying, we have a product team. Why the hell would we talk with you? And my theory, though, was that product teams either don't have the experience that I've had, or they want to accelerate, or whatever it is, right, that I can help with.
Yeah,
So I've started working with companies in different stages. So I've worked everything from Series A to multi-billion company. The experiences are very different. So I do a range of things. It's never very defined. It mostly comes out of the discussion, the
yeah.
first discussions where I'm trying to figure out what people are trying to achieve and where they see the gaps. But yeah, it's everything, from a product audit, so figuring out how does the whole chain work, from what should we be doing, how do we identify that, how do we define it, how do we design things, how do we munch it into a roadmap, how do we then launch it. So from the sort of product audit, figuring out how it works, all the way to working with the teams, working with the individual product managers, working with the CPO. Sometimes one of the things I've done, which was really interesting, is rewriting a strategy. So we did a pivot of a company a little bit. So we rewrote a complete strategy over several weeks. And I think the lowest touch I do is coaching. So coaching chief products, a sort of a couple of hours a week. Bringing up topics and helping them navigate and manage the whole thing to become more efficient at it, basically. So I hope this gives an idea. This is the sort of range of things. But product is pretty big and fluffy, and so I think the hardest part of the job is always trying to figure out at the beginning a sort of finite bucket of things that I do, which will have an impact, basically.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to ask you, like, what's the pain? Like, why do clients come to you in the first place? Under what circumstance does a client say, I think we need Christian? Like,
yeah,
because if they've got a fluffy problem, then they're not going to say we have a fluffy problem. But what's
exactly. So product is difficult for somebody who's not in product or who doesn't have the sort of training in this area. It's difficult to understand what works and what doesn't currently in the company. So I've had cases where a CEO would come to me asking through referrals and connections, would ask, I'm not sure if product's doing the right thing. And so, of course, there's always two sides to the story. So then I talk to product and I hear the other side. There are companies that came to me for scaling, for example. They said, look, we have a setup at the moment. We have 3 product managers. We're in a particular situation and we want to scale next year. We want to scale to 20, 30, 40, 50, etc. customers. But we feel we're not ready for that. So how do we change the structure? There are cases where it's about the strategy, for example. So we did a strategy, and then the company helped me. Asked me to help implement the strategy to bring that in. So there's many different situations that happen. Yeah, where companies need help.
Step by step. Sometimes, like, there's a bit of like, let's have a conversation, and then it's like, okay, let's have your review of the strategy, and then looks like we've got some challenges of how product is working with engineering, or product's working with marketing or sales, and how do we, or it looks like we're not sure about the processes, and then it looks like, okay, then we got some good ideas here now, let's execute. Can you help us execute?
In general, yes, exactly. And in general, also what I would say is, one person has one view of a situation, and then when you talk to everyone in the mix, of course, reality becomes more complicated. And so the biggest question then is, how do you figure out what to do out of this mix of things, right? Out of mix of frictions here, situations there. How do you actually figure this out? And this, I'm enjoying this particularly. So I'm in the right spot for myself.
Yeah, for
sure. But it's exciting. Yeah, it's very exciting.
That's great. It's always good to get that product market fit feeling. I mean, we both of us are sort of consultants doing different things, and you still have that. We're working with companies that are dealing with product market fit, but also we're having to get product market fit for ourselves and figure that out. And I know for me, it was a real challenge to go from, hey, I'm here and I can do stuff and I have some experience and things, to getting more narrow and making very specific propositions to companies and finding out what that fits.
Yeah, I can. That's a really interesting point. Actually, I needed to find product market fit, right? And as a good product person, I thought I should approach this like a product, basically, myself. And initially, the one of the challenges was, how do I actually speak with people? And my resume, I compared this to a sort of a list of ingredients, and people want to know what they're going to get on their plate, right? And so that's the closest metaphor I found, where basically, everybody has a problem and they want it solved. And so it doesn't help them to know that, okay, you have these skills, thanks. Okay, cheers. Awesome. But how do you actually apply this? And what are you going to do for me? That's what people want to know. How are you going to help us solve our problems?
What's in it for me? What do I get out of this? Like what and I guess that really comes down to, what problem do I think I have, and what problem am I looking to solve? And then how do you help I solve that problem?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's been quite a challenge as well initially. To figure that out, on top of actually solving the problems for people, right? So there's a whole product packaging, product go-to-market, etc. for you as a person that I had to get through.
Yeah, exactly. It's a massive challenge. So once you do that, you sort of do that sort of like someone figures out. I guess most of your work comes through referrals, right? Is that what happens?
Yeah, most of my work comes through referrals. I realized that it's a very personal business, basically. So it comes through referrals. It comes through connections. And so either I work with people I know or people who know people I know. Basically, it's a very personally. There's always a personal reference somewhere in the chain.
Yeah, for sure. I guess, I mean, then that's also the case for me. Although every now and again I get someone cold who comes out and just sort of like,
Yeah.
I've seen what you're talking about or what you're doing, or I've seen your posts or something like that, and I've never heard of them. They don't know anyone. We don't know anyone in common, or at least no one significant. And it just sort of pops up, and that's a really interesting experience
Yeah.
because suddenly it means that something about what you're doing resonates with that customer. And this is where my content about, I think I talk about OKRs a lot and things like that, and that just seems to resonate. And so you're
Mhm.
getting, part of that is about getting more visibility in the market, and resonates, and it sort of works. So
Everybody has the OKR problem.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a good business to be in. But with the product stuff, when you go to these companies, when you start out, like, so someone's got a pain about something, they're worried about their product team, they're worried about their strategy, they're worried about execution. Execution is always a big issue for leaders of any startup. Every startup I've ever come across, the CEO always says, "We're executing too slowly. What can we do?" But that's always a big issue. But in your product area, it's often more focused on the product roadmap and the product strategy and product market fit and things like that, and go to market and so on. What do you think? What do you find when you start there? What are the underlying issues that cause these pains that you come across that you think, here's the solution? Or how long does it take you to go, we have a conversation, I come in, I talk to people, and then here's the solution? Or is it more a matter of, we'll work for 6 weeks or whatever, and we'll come up with different solutions, and the solutions are different for everyone? Is it
Mhm.
common sources of pain?
So there are patterns, obviously, right? The I would say that the general pattern of product, if you take it from the what's your vision as a company, how did you describe your mission, what's your strategy, then how does that trickle down into objectives overall for the year, how do you trickle it down into objectives at quarter level, for example, in OKRs, how do you then decompose this into individual things like features or improvements or retiring a feature. So however you break it up, I mean, there is, if you follow this chain, there are patterns, of course. So there's always, for example, friction between the product team and the commercial team. So it's not just inside of
Yeah,
product, right? There's always things where prioritization goes wrong. Okay, so then you realize, there's been frictions there. There's been history. There's a lot of stuff that has been amassed over time. There is, people they move from sprints to Kanban to other things and try to come the other way around. And like, this
yeah,
didn't work for us. This worked for us. This we really liked. This didn't hit the spot. People change customers, so they change customer types, and then everything becomes different, right? So you need to do things. You may have quality problems. You mentioned the execution; it's really hard.
yeah,
So anyway, so basically, there's a whole stack of things to look at when first meeting a company, and I think that generally takes a couple of weeks. Basically, in a week or two, you can find a week or two of deep interviews and reading, and I always tell everyone, show me your Jira and I can tell you the quality of your product.
yeah,
Where it's quite interesting if you read the Jira as well, which does surprise some people that I want to go in and read individual tickets and epics and everything. But it does in the end, down to the detail. It trickles down. You see the result of what the whole stack above has produced, basically, and what the developer will implement and what you will get at the end. And
yeah,
so many things happen. So typical things are focus. We have a roadmap. No, we are building this now. And you think, well, does it still make sense? Why? How? Is there something more impactful you could build right now? Do you
yeah,
actually need to do that? um,
yeah, for
I
sure.
find I find what I find very interesting, for example, with growth companies, is that you have the ability to change that. If the companies get bigger and bigger, it's much harder to have an impact, right? So you can say as many nice and
Yeah,
constructive things as you want. If it's difficult to sort of implement, it makes it a bit more frustrating for me. It makes it more frustrating for the team, but they know that it's difficult because it's a bigger ship to steer.
yeah.
Um,
I
so
mean, I
so
have
you're
that experience as well with the whole, like, working with big companies. I always initially thought big companies are the right place to go, but then everyone I was working with was middle management, and they were frustrated because they couldn't change anything. But then we didn't have access to the senior leaders. Whereas with now I'm working with growth companies, as a consultant, you're engaged by the senior leadership team, and so hence you have access to them, and hence you can actually help them solve problems, and then it has a big impact on the organization. I think it's really marvelous.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, please. No, it's I mean, the topic is wide, right? So we could go on
Yeah.
for the whole weekend. But basically, so for me, it's about identifying where are the weak points in this whole combination, and then developing a plan for people and how could we fix them. So how can we move forward with this in pragmatic terms? So how can we actually, let's say your sales team and your product team are arguing, and typical, right? The two sides like wah. You're selling things that we can't build yet. You haven't asked us, and you
Yep.
promise them to the client. It's difficult. And on
Yeah.
the other hand, the sales team goes, well, with you guys, it's a feature every 6 months, and so we can't sell anything because we don't have enough features, right?
Yeah.
So how do you? I mean, literally, I could take a bit the backseat and say, okay, guys, you have a problem there. Okay, see ya, bye. Here's my invoice, right?
Right.
But I
Right.
actually enjoy as well trying to figure out ways forward, because I always think, well, you've got the people, you've got the investment, you've got the setup, you've got the clients. I mean, everything's there for you to be successful, but internally there's some friction. So why not figure out some pragmatic way forward? And I find
Yeah.
that half the work is then about product itself, so the procedures, the hygiene of how is product done, but half the work is generally about getting teams to work together in a better way, basically. So bridging the gaps and getting them to work together quite pragmatically to produce a roadmap that will make both sides happy, push back on both sides, but then to get some agreements going, right? And that's I think where there's a bit of a cooking recipe as well. I would
Yeah. Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Getting
But
getting
yeah,
that getting
it looks
getting
like it.
people to
And
talk in the right ways, and getting that solution
yeah,
together. I mean, most of the work that I've done has ended up being the value. A lot of the value is often around getting people to talk about things in the right way. And in fact, there's one client that I worked with recently, where one of the biggest values that I found, well, the problem that they were having, and one of the problems they were having was that different groups weren't working together and communicating together well.
yeah,
And one of the ways we dealt with that was we used OKRs to get people to talk about their plans and having
exactly.
the discussion about their plans in place in those meetings. And then the marketing person would say, "Well, this is my plan," and then the engineering person would say, "Well, I don't understand what that is," or "I've got a question about that," or whatever. And sometimes it will be one of those questions that you might think, one might think, "Well, that's just because you're not a marketing person, you don't understand what marketing is." But the point is that at this executive level, you really want everyone to understand. That's the point of having a team. You want them to start to understand and take an interest, and you have a different angle. So engineering person could ask a question that would then turn into, this is an interesting angle to go down. I hadn't thought of it that way. That's a new one. Sometimes it's just a matter of, we have thought of it that way, and here's how it works, and this is what's going on.
Mhm.
And now engineering person and the rest of the people in the room understand a bit more about the marketing strategy, which is really wonderful for a company. But finding ways of causing those conversations to happen is really part of the challenge there, right?
It is. It is. It's a challenge because the vocabularies are different, the goals of each team are different, and so I see one thing I see in growth companies, for example, a typical thing is take founders, for example, and so um,
Did you say thick founders?
take founders. Sorry, take
Thick
the
founders,
founders.
okay, thick founders, right? As an example,
No,
yeah.
no, no, no.
He said
Take,
one of the problems is thick founders, and well, yes, thick founders would be a problem, but okay,
no,
thick
no,
founders.
no. Take the founders, for example. So the founders have a big vested interest, right? And they understand their business because they've been in it for a long time. They've identified a problem. They've started it from scratch. But then the rest of the team, for example, doesn't, right? It's younger team members. They just they're a few years out of university, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so you have these discussions sometimes where it's clear to the founder where they want to go, but it's not clear to the rest of the team. And so then
Yeah,
sales goes in one direction, marketing goes in another direction, engineering goes in another direction, product thinks something. And in order to align all that, it's really difficult. And so I think there, sometimes one of the interesting things, this is another topic we could even talk about as well, is what stage is your company at? But in
yeah,
terms of the growth companies, I think a big job of the head of product, for example, is to simply literally manage to get the conversation on the same level with everyone, so that everybody actually talks the same language and
yeah,
goes forward in the same in a sort of a synchronized way. Like, we're doing the same thing, we're going after the same objectives, and we're
yes,
doing our own thing, right? But we're actually trying to produce the same result together, and that's
yeah.
that's a difficult one. Yeah, it's a quite difficult one.
I mean,
Um,
this is something where we're in common, because that's obviously with OKRs, it's all about getting the same objectives and getting the same key results and having people using the same words and the same language to be able to talk about the goal that they're trying to get to, and then realizing that this is not your OKR, this is not marketing's OKR and product's OKR and engineering's OKR. This is a company OKR. We're all working together on it, and we want to try to sort of work, get the brains trust of the team to collaborate on this. But one thing I found with this is that you can't force people down a path of this is the right way and this is what these are the right words to be using. Especially as a consultant, as an external, but even internally, when I've been internal to companies, dictating that doesn't work. It kind of needs to be something of an organic process where people talk about things, and then because they're talking about it on a regular basis, they develop a common vocabulary. And sometimes it's not the common vocabulary I want, but it's everyone has a bit of a compromise to make.
No, absolutely. I think this is a good it's a good observation. Every team comes up with their own way of formulating things. I think that's the thing though that you want to figure out in the alignments, right? They're getting teams to work together. I think that's what I want to understand, because I don't care how everybody calls what, but if you have a chat together and you say, for example, let's say our incoming traffic on the homepage, right? We get traffic from different sources. It lands, we analyze it, we know the conversion of each. If you don't actually talk about the same thing between, let's say, engineering and marketing, let's say marketing on lead gen, and marketing is creating some inflow. Engineering is then, capturing some of that flow and converting them to users, active users, etc. So if you don't talk about the same things, you're not going to manage to optimize that, to improve the funnel, right? So at some points, the touch points, at least, you need to have ways to find the same words together. And I don't care which one it is, the word, but it should be so that people understand that this audience group is this particular audience group, that other one is this other one, and that they can talk about this by talking about the same things, right? So, for example, segmentation. Let's take segmentation, and you want to segment audience groups according to demographics or sources or whatever it is, right? You need to have the same. At some point, you need to have a vocabulary that overlaps. Otherwise, you go crazy. So there are moments that you need to find that. I think that's part of the challenge, is to get the teams to talk about the same things.
Yeah, and the only way to do that is with an organic conversation with people talking about it, and then pointing out that actually this is the same thing as this thing, or that's using the same word for different things, or different words for the same thing. Can we, and just people sort of slowly come around to it.
And this particular one, by the way, has become, I find, a little bit more tricky with remote work. And it used to be really easy on a whiteboard, because you draw two boxes and you say, wait, what do you mean? This here or that there. And you don't have that luxury now. So there is a little bit of extra effort, I think, to make when you talk about these things with different teams.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Actually, one of the things that I was thinking about is, because you got different teams there, you obviously, when you come in as a product leader consultant, you're not just working with product.
Exactly.
To be fair, product doesn't just work with product, right? You've got to work across the board. Do you find you sort of brought in with this idea of like, there's a problem with my product process or my product roadmap or execution, and people have obviously chosen a product leader consultant to come in because they think there's a problem in the product area. But do you find that the problem is often broader than that, or what is it? Is it like caused by product that then spills elsewhere, or is it caused by elsewhere that comes with product?
So yes. But first I would say, I'm not coming in as, there's a problem, we need to fix it. And there's a little bit of work to be done on how I get into a company, because obviously I'm here to help, right? So I've had a chief product once who said, look, it's great that you're here. I'm sure we're gonna, figure out things. But frankly, I'm a bit insulted because, clearly my CEO doesn't trust me and whatnot. And then I said, well, or he could have fired you and replaced you with someone else, but he thinks that it's worth investing in you, and now I'm here. So you can make the best of it, or let's look at the positive side, right? So I think there is a little bit of a step, inevitably, right, when you go somewhere and you get into a company. But one of my biggest objectives in the first week is to make it super obvious that I'm here to help. And if somebody wants the help, is great. We're going to build something cool. If somebody doesn't want the help, then hey, I can go home, basically, and it's wasted money. So I need, in my first week, there's a little bit of work around that. And then what happens is, for example, a CEO once told me, listen, My team, every 2 weeks, I tell them the strategy. I don't know what the hell I have to do to tell the team the strategy. Frankly, I don't know what I have to do. And then I'm like, okay. And I talk to the team, the product team, and and I say, I'm trying to ask right politely. I'm like, so how when do you guys talk about strategy? And they go, oh man, every 2 weeks. And they say, but you know what? Every 2 weeks is different
Yeah.
because he's been at a conference, he's been at a CEO meeting. Every 2 weeks we have some different things. So I was like, interesting, right? So there's always two sides. So in this particular case,
The
for example,
CEO assumedly doesn't realize that it's different, right? They think that they're talking the same thing every time.
you have your own perspective, obviously, right? It's
Yeah,
difficult to step out of your own shoes. And so what I did is I sort of forced both sides. I wrote down what the strategy was. And then 2 weeks later, I said, hey, this is what you said 2 weeks ago. Interesting. So in this particular case, what was interesting is that there were things that we should be careful about the market that's moving very fast every 2 weeks.
yeah.
But you can't build software in different directions every 2 weeks. So
No,
what we
yeah,
what we tried doing, and it worked quite okay, is to say, okay, there's two levels. One level of things that you want are very strong, and we know they're there, and they're going to be there in 6 months. And so
right.
let's work on those. And then let's spend 20-30% of the road of the effort on smaller tactical things that you come back with from a conference, from some talk, from some this and that. And then because we split them, the team knew what was a sort of a constant roadmap that was predictable for a few weeks at least, right? Versus something that could have been on Monday saying, hey, can we build this by Thursday, right?
For your client or yeah,
I heard from a company, for example, this week that they said, oh, one of our competitors got bought out. So great. So we're going to try to grab the customers.
yeah,
Because the competitor got bought out, it's going to take time to ingest the platform into the bigger company. So they're shutting down, whatnot, and so this company needs to do some tactical, super fast things in order to capture these customers, and that's worth doing, right? It's worth changing the roadmap a bit for that. So
yeah, yeah,
basically, every team has different opinions, different ways they're working, and in general, that's what happens, right? Prioritization, for example, it's difficult
yeah,
with all the different parties, and who are the parties, who are the stakeholders, how do they give you the input, how do they give you how important or urgent it is for them, what will it enable. And it's a whole job to for the product team basically to get this going. So yes, the problems are never, it's never, the product team has a problem. It's always there's something we want to improve in the company, and we have some thoughts around this of what's wrong, but we are not quite sure about how to improve it quickly. So therefore, that's why I get then into the
yeah.
discussion with the company.
And you get, it goes around to different groups of the organization. What you mentioned there about this whole, like, something happens and then you have to change the product strategy. One of my clients had a situation where they're very regulated, a highly regulated market. And they had a large number of target markets they were trying to go into, but they had to get a license for each market before they went into it. And you couldn't
Hmm.
predict exactly when these licenses would come, but they had a basic feeling that each one would take quite some time. Anyway,
Yeah,
one of their biggest target markets suddenly just turned around very quickly and said, yes, go ahead. Here's your license. Um, and so this is mid sprint. They basically had to say,
yeah,
quick, we need to go into this market now. And of course, that caused a massive challenge in the product and engineering department. So, but we've already set our goals. We've set our sprint.
yeah,
We can't just change in the middle of it. And the fact is, in this situation, that I know it's hard. It's a cost. It's intentionally a cost. We know it's a cost, but we have to do this because this is the this is the market we're going after.
yeah.
And sometimes you do incur a cost, and the cost is actually okay to incur as long as you're making the conscious choice. And in the same organization would have other issues that they would talk about that they would change, but they were more sort of like gut feeling. Oh, I think we do this. I think we do that. And there wasn't really that sort of understanding of when we make a change, there is a cost. And that some of them it made sense. Like, we have there's a new market here. Let's go into that market, and that makes sense to have.
That's interesting. It's a really interesting point you raise. One of the biggest things, which I never understood back in the days, was people were asking me like, "Hey, do you have a roadmap?" I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't know. Here's the first three things we're going to build, and then if we see how they work, and then we see further, right? Yeah, but where's the roadmap? And so basically, I always try to resist because I thought, well, we're going to commit to things, and what if it changes,
yeah,
right? And I think in the meantime, of course, I understand sales teams need this, roadmap needs that. So I think in the meantime, I like building roadmaps actually, quite a while out. but with a caveat to say, look, we know the next 6 weeks are for sure, but even Monday something could change. But what I
Yeah.
think is the hardest part for companies, and that's one aspect of this. The hardest part is to switch in a conscious way.
Yeah.
What you mentioned there, and so you made me think about this, because I think one of the toughest jobs of the chief product is to set out the vision and to set it out clearly and to say, look, we can move to this bigger market now. We can start literally today. It's Wednesday. We can drop
Mhm.
the pens. We can just archive everything, right? Or just put the branch on ice that we're working on. But here's what it's going to cost us. And
Yeah.
so, here's here's a scenario, and here's what it's going to cost us. So visualizing that for executive leadership, for the team, for everyone else, and eventually, down the line, you need to put it onto a board slide as well for your board to say, hey, we're going to change, and here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so in order to tell that story, that's definitely square on the shoulders of the chief product, and this is a particular thing to be careful about. And so sometimes I do see companies where, and as I said, I struggled with this myself for 10 years before it finally clicked. At a certain point, I clicked. I was like, yeah, people want to know. That's my job, actually. Who else is going to put out the vision than the head of product?
Exactly. If you're going to make those realistic things happen, and we've had just recently, we've had this summer two major global crises that have affected almost every company
Yeah,
in the world. A pandemic and then a major European war. And these things happen, and suddenly you have to change, and you can't predict them. You can't time them for the start of a quarter or a sprint or anything like that. But if you have, I mean, it's the same with OKRs actually. But if you have written down, here's our roadmap, here's our product roadmap. If we've written down, here are our OKRs,
yeah,
and then something happens, there's a crisis, a war, a new opportunity, an acquisition, a company goes bankrupt, whatever it is, you can at least have that conversation and say, yeah, let's go and change that. What are we changing? Here is our list of
yeah,
OKRs. Here is our roadmap. Here is our plan. If we
exactly.
change it, then this changes and that changes. But at least I have something to talk about to
Yeah.
change it, and I have something concrete to be able to say, let's have a structured conversation about, do we want to make this change?
Yeah, I found that if you make lately, somebody told me, like, hey Christian, I figured this out. I pay you to draw boxes because I love drawing boxes. Here, I'm trying to do this in front of the camera, but basically, if you have a roadmap and suddenly something happens here, and you can say, okay, we're going to move this further back because we're going to do something in the middle here,
I'll give you more
then
room.
everybody goes, oh yeah, okay, I get it, right? And it's
Yeah.
that piece which you need to really provide as well as a head of product, I think, that's particularly on the head of product shoulder. um,
Yeah, it's
and
all
and
about
it's
creating that framework in the first place. So you've put the effort in because you're the head of product, because that's the job. I'll put myself back
yeah,
on screen again. But I mean, you put the effort in. I'm having a bit of fun with the screen layouts here, but you put the effort in advance because you're a leader, and so what you're doing is creating that work, that you're making sure you have the ability to have these
exactly.
conversations, so that when stuff happens, as it always does, you can have a structured conversation. Because otherwise, what happens, and this is something that I've seen happen with more junior people in particular, and it's something that I've done, especially as a more junior person, is when someone wants to change something, I've got all this roadmap or thing in my head, plans in
Yeah,
my head, and they want to change something, but it's going to change everything, and it's going to cost. Well, tell me what. I said, oh, I can't, because I haven't really clarified exactly what it is that we're doing, and I haven't got it written down anywhere, and I haven't got a plan to change. So then I can't tell you what it is. So then they can't make a decision, or they can't make an informed decision. And ironically, by not having a roadmap that's written down or plans, you're less agile.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's very interesting. It's a bit of a contradiction, but yes, I mean, I think it's because roadmap has a lot of connotation. And when somebody says, "Oh, make a roadmap," it means decide. I think the usual interpretation is decide what you're going to do and in what order. And in fact, the
Yeah.
roadmap is indicative. You can just say, "Look, the next 6 weeks are committed, and then we'll see."
Yeah,
Because
exactly. At least you have a
I
conversation.
think, yeah, I think this whole, I think everybody, I mean, me included, with inertia, you get into a sort of direction and routine, and then you don't actually think every Monday morning is, what is the most impact we could do this week, right? What is it actually? And the
Yeah.
hard part is managing that, is to manage, to say, why don't we do something different? Here's a new idea that seems to be more interesting, and could be better, have better results. How fast can we change the sort of the track that we have at the moment, the development track? And so
Yeah.
So then companies, a lot of companies go into the should we have an innovation team, should we have a growth team, etc. And so it's a bit difficult, but I find it very interesting to be able to do that. And I think visualizing a roadmap is super important. Yeah.
Yeah, Leslie's just commented and said unlocking decision making is key, which is
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about. And I think
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you
Not
remember Leslie, but I remember Leslie from Google in London. Hi, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie, because I was just thinking about this and I'm thinking, not taking decision, not having it visualized, not having it with an ability to take a decision immediately makes you completely put your head in the sand, basically, and you sit there for
Yeah,
weeks without knowing what to do, and you can't judge. You're like, okay, if we do this, then what happens? But if we do the other, what happens? So yeah, it's
yeah,
it's it's really important to be able to compare these things, right?
yeah. Hey, I'm going to go back a bit because there's another question that's come up here from Marcus Holfener, and I'm not sure if I'm saying his name correctly. Haffelner, so Haffelner, Marcus Haffelner.
Marcus,
I know Marcus. I've said it about 4 times, and hopefully one of them is right. So it's a little long question. I think it's sort of targeted at me, but actually it's really relevant to what you were talking about earlier as well, Christian, about coming into an organization and orienting. So what he said here, I'm going to read it out. I'll lift myself up so you can see me above it. Richard, does your focus on OKRs stem from identifying common problems companies have with a specific framework, which is currently highly regarded? I imagine this makes positioning your consulting services easier. So, for example, saying, I help you introduce outcome-based roadmaps in B2B will resonate better than I help you with roadmaps. Yes, that's true. Being more specific, just as a sales technique, third time is a charm. Huffelner, is that right? He's just put another comment there. So I think that basically in marketing, you do have to be specific and being talking to a customer. That makes sense. How does it work if the framework is actually not a fit for the problem, although the customer thinks it is? Does this matchmaking happen before or during? And I think it means the engagement. Marcus, if I missed something there, let me know. But from I'll talk a little bit about this, Christian, and then I'll ask you a question related to it because I think it's really relevant to what you're talking about. But just on that topic, the way I see what I do, so I'm selling OKRs. This is my business. I talk to usually growth company executives and help them implement OKRs. Now, in reality, I'm actually doing a lot of leadership coaching and team coaching and just how we operate as managers and management techniques and leadership techniques and things like that. But I structure it all around OKRs. That's what I do. Now, the reason I do that, and this is related to the first part of this question, I'm pointing over there because on my screen it's over there. I help you introduce, saying something more specific and using a highly regarded framework really helps. It works really well for me because most companies, when they go through a growth stage, talk to their VCs and their VCs say, you guys aren't well organized enough, or you don't know what you're doing, or you need some help aligning people, or you have this problem or that problem or the other problem, and someone suggests, hey, you should try OKRs, or they read the book, or else they've just heard about OKRs and they're like, oh, we have trouble aligning people. We need to use OKRs. So now they go and search for someone, and they often find me because I work in the growth space with exec teams doing OKRs. So it fits. But in reality, what I'm delivering is a whole lot of different stuff, and I adapt it. And so it's not just like, here is the OKR method, and we all do it this way. And you've bought OKRs, so here are the 17 steps. It's very customized. And one of the ways that I do this, and this is what I wanted to really relate this back to your question to you, Christian, as well. One of the ways I adapt things is the first thing I do is I interview the 4 or 5 or 10 key executives in the organization. And I spend half an hour to an hour with each one of them just to understand where they're at, what they think. And one of the reasons is because OKR is a branded technique. It's something that people have preconceived notions of what it is and what it's not. Sometimes I have to uncover what it is that they're expecting and what they're not and what they're worried about and all of that sort of stuff, so that we can then craft something that really does work for that organization. Do you go in when you start? So then I adapt the training and we have a conversation and we try and align things, and getting people in the same rooms helps when you know them, because I already know them by then. And so that really helps me. Do you how do you make sure that when you're starting out, you're sort of going in there and it's not just like focus on product? Do you immediately reach out to these people, or is that like that's something you do after the first week?
Yeah, so I actually say this in advance to people. I say that in the first week I will just interview people, and I start with all the leaders. So I interview the head of everything, right? Head of this, head of that, marketing, commerce, revenue, head of strategy, head of partnerships, head of product, head of engineering, head of whatever. I mean, there's plenty, right? So the So the reason is that you need to understand the overall sort of dynamics.
Mhm.
And I find OKRs are generally, I mean, Marcus, to your question, OKRs are adapted to a lot of situations, I find, because the actual work for me is beforehand. So in the discussion, what is it you want to achieve? And so
Yeah,
you have a discussion, what we talked about earlier, right? With vocabulary, you have different teams. So if you figure out what you want to achieve, then it's easy to write down. And I find that when you're in this sort of headache of how are we going to word this OKR, it's you way too far down the
yeah,
down the path. You should come back up a step and say maybe we're not clear about what we want to achieve, right? And
exactly.
and this is really the thing is I find that writing the OKR itself is literally just jotting down my thoughts. Basically, is what's the objective? Very clear, just the objective. What's the KR? How do we measure it? And
Yep.
then the roadmap, which is what we're going to do in the quarter, which has nothing to like. It should not be in the OKRs. What we're going to do in the quarter will be measured by the KRs in order to know how far are we towards the O. But I find that
Yeah,
a lot of the work is beforehand. I think OKRs in particular are maybe not so adapted to big companies that, for example, have, let's say, 12 months of build out for a platform that needs to migrate. So what is the objective? Is, well, the platform needs to migrate, and we need
yeah,
to be able to do the, it's not stuff where you will say, great, how are customers finding this now? It's like, well, they're using the platform from before, we're migrating to a newer platform, so hey, it should do the same use case. So you basically have a roadmap where it's quite waterfally, right? You know what you have to do.
yeah,
um, so in some of these cases, OKR don't apply, but in general, you can use OKRs very well when you have a part of discovery, a part of customers, a part of things that you build that are new, and that you need to figure out where to go with it, right? But yeah,
yeah.
initially interview everyone because you need to figure out how the dynamics are, and only then, OKRs is sort of like one of the frameworks you can use, which I really like. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, just on the topic of big companies, I have worked with a few big companies on OKRs, and it is a difference. There is a difference in terms of
mm,
um, uh, uh, how they work and what they're trying to do. So there are different stages of companies. You have this company at the early stage startup is really about like the search, and what they're trying to do. The objective is to identify a thing that a customer wants, like identify product market fit, then it's identify a business model that can scale, and things like that. And so you're developing your OKRs based on that search and what am I trying to achieve. And then you get the next stage is kind of the execution stage, which is where
mm,
we tend to focus, the execution and growth stage. And then the established company stage is kind of where we're maintaining things and we're milking the cow and we're trying to find new cash cows and all that sort of stuff. Um, uh, but it is different, but you can adapt it to that exactly that thing, because in many cases you still have that same problem of I've got 30 people working on this project, and every now and again they have some, every week they have some sort of debate about what are we doing, and someone says, what are we really trying to achieve here? And the answer to that is
no,
whatever's in the hour, right? That's what you're trying to achieve, and that helps them answer that question, helps resolve those things. It gives
yeah,
them guidance, and that's the purpose of the OKR. It's in my mind is to give guidance to people so that they know what it is, and it relates back to the strategy. And I found it fascinating that you said strategy when you're writing an OKR. If you don't know what your strategy is, it's really hard. I don't know. I'm misquoting you completely, but I think I've got the right
yeah,
gist. It's really hard if you don't know what your strategy is, and you get stuck on like the wording of an OKR, and that usually means that you don't know what you're trying to achieve. That's
yeah,
basically what you said.
yeah,
And something that I found so often, and when you get stuck on that, then the real problem is that you don't really know what your strategy is. And
yeah,
you might have had, maybe you've been very clear on your strategy every 2 weeks with a presentation, or maybe you've had this beautiful presentation that's got
yeah,
PowerPoint everywhere with flashing lights and beautiful diagrams. But if we don't really, if it's not obvious what our OKRs are, then we don't know what our strategy is. And so I sometimes use OKRs as a tool to help people, what's the word? Help people discover that they don't know what their strategy is.
yeah.
They need
Many
to.
times. Many times
Yeah,
when you're deep in the weeds with the OKRs, and you ask a seemingly innocent question that, like, by the way, what's our ideal customer like, what's our target of customers? And you basically, the whole machine
sure.
stops, right? It's like, what are our customers? And so you have to backtrack. But I find the interesting thing is the OKRs, the effect you have when it's hard to write is the same effect that you have when, for example, like feature A, feature B. which one should we implement next,
Yeah.
right? And if you can't decide, basically it's maybe it doesn't matter, so do either. But if you feel that there should be a difference and you don't know how to why or put the finger on it, then always go back up a step, and then you realize, the step above wasn't defined clearly enough. So it could be the
Yeah.
strategy, it could be the go to market, could be something. But basically it's always a step back, right? You take a step back up and you realize, yes, it wasn't clear enough, the framework. And so it's the same with OKRs, I think. Yeah, it's if you're stuck in the
Yeah. Yeah.
OKR, write it. Just forget writing the OKR, right? Like take a whiteboard and figure out where you are and what you're trying to achieve actually.
Yeah, for sure. And I was going to ask you as well, like, I mean, because I think that's a really useful thing to summarize a lot of things that we're talking about here in some ways. Because it's like, well, what are you trying to do? And that's a lot of what product is really about, is deciding what you're trying to do. But and this is maybe a bit of a tough question in some ways, but what do you find helps move the needle in companies you work in? Like when you're doing things, what really has a big impact that you're doing with your companies, and or how do you help the product teams have a big impact? What is it that you're really doing that's helping them move the needle?
It depends what kind of what I'm there for, right? And so in terms of, I can tell you one company that wanted to become more growth oriented, so ready for growth and scaling.
Yep.
I literally drew a diagram of how I mean, it took me a while to think about it, etc. And then I had a diagram on how I think the team should be built and how the events would come in. The sort of, we have a new customer, what happens, right? So let's say it's customer number 2, then we can have, here's what will happen. This team does this team does that. Then we have customer number 20, what will happen, right? And so the system should still, I mean, the sort of org map and the who takes care of what, who has the relationship with the client, who then gets all the feature requests, who gets approval for signing the contract, to not sign silly things over. So all of that, once you have a system that works, you can say, okay, we can still deal with number 50, but with number 100, it'll fail. But frankly, right now we're at 4 customers. So if we get to 50, it'll be a good problem to have.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so I changed the company structure, but I needed to basically figure out that everybody's on board, right? So I chatted with every single leader differently, separately. First with the founder and the CEO of the company, of course, to see, is he on board.
Yeah.
And so it took a long time. It took several days, basically, of chats to explain to everyone how it looks like, what it would do with the model. That's one,
Yeah.
right? But I figured I'm trying to approach it exactly the same way as I would approach feature building or product building or something, to think, what is the next step that will have the impact? And so I can only decide that if I know where I want to go. So in this case, where I wanted to go is that we redesign the company and make a transition, right? So change the role slightly of product management, introduce a role on the commercial side and things like that. And
Yeah.
so I mapped out, okay, the steps to get there are mostly to convince people, and then to have a solution, like a proposal that works for up to, let's say, 50 clients, right? And I'm talking
Yeah.
B2B clients. I'm not saying 50 users, sign up, but I'm saying 50 clients that have contracts, that have contractual things, and
Yeah.
it will take a hit. And then basically that it was that. In another case, for example, I wrote an audit, and the audit was around product performance. But actually, what I ended up saying is, yes, but there's something in the market that could help you, basically, where
Yeah.
it seems the trend is going. So that helped basically the company to change a little bit the thinking. There was another case where I came in to help the product team, but it turns out that it was slightly working on the wrong things and in the wrong way.
Mhm.
And of course, it's not just me coming in and saying, ha ha ha, I think you have to do something different. But I started to go after, where are the client interviews? Where can I read those?
Yeah.
And then the first alarm bell goes off when you don't have client interviews to read. And you think, okay, so how often do product
We're doing.
managers talk to the clients? Oh, no, we have to be careful because they can't. I'm like, what do you
Yeah.
mean they can't? Yeah, no, they're not expert enough. But if they're not expert enough, how do they build the software for that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um, so in that case, it was, for example, to help. So I needed to figure out, what is the blockage. Why is it that product managers are not talking to customers? Because this has to happen, right? So how did I figure how could I figure out what the steps are in order to get that going? So there's everything, right, from head of sales who's afraid that the product managers maybe don't sound professional enough,
Yeah.
and maybe are too negative also, compared to a salesperson, because the product managers, of course, are like all of us were like, yeah, no, the software doesn't do that, software doesn't do that, and that would be interesting to build. Is like, wait, you don't have this, and so the salesperson gets really nervous when the product manager is in the room, because you have a much more open discussion. So you need to figure out how to select, how would you filter customers to figure out who to talk to, so that you can
Yeah.
have a constructive discussion, right? There could be head of support who's a bit nervous, because again, they've been working on these customers for a long time to get them to where they are, and then here comes the product manager who goes on wild tangents of like, what if we built this? Would you like that? So
Yeah.
you get really freaked out what you're going to tell to the customers. And so
Yeah.
so for example, that particular one, the question was, how can we break down this barrier in a way that makes people feel comfortable, right? And not that after the first or the second discussion, see, I told you it's going to explode, we have to go back, right? Because if you
Yeah.
make a change, you want to be successful in the change, right? You want it to be useful
Yeah.
and long lasting, and not just something that you do on the side. So I think this is what I'm enjoying, for example, as opposed to you're focusing on the KRs, and I'm focusing on the fluffy problems, which is a little bit different, but it always starts with the same, a bit like you interviews, figure out where things are, and figure out what is it that you would fix actually, or change or not, right? But
Yeah.
where are the improvement possibilities? And so depending on the company is very different. But the
Yeah.
hard part is to figure out what is it that moves the needle also in these changes, instead of just like, okay, we're going to write PRDs now, or
Yeah.
if you don't need PRDs, you don't need PRDs, but generally you do. But
Yeah.
don't get me
Yeah,
started
exactly.
on.
'Cause there's no point in just implementing a product process. Like, here is the best practice. We need to do something that makes a difference to the business and that actually delivers
Exactly,
results.
exactly. It's not just about, yeah, it's not just the
Yeah.
activity that counts, right? It's the result, yeah.
And a lot of the things you were talking about in terms of like getting different groups of people understanding things and helping things and kind of interfering in some sense. Like, it's like, there are organizations I've been in where silos were, in fact, I worked in one company where one of the C-suite said, we're trying to create silos. This was a small company, of
Really.
about 70 people, and they wanted to create silos so that people could focus on their work and not be interfered with by everyone else. And it's just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you're trying to create silos that everyone else is trying to remove and break them down, because what you want is this collaboration and this level of trust and this understanding. And then once you have that, you have these breakthroughs of, it turns out that operations really don't understand this thing about customers that I can use in product, then we can use in sales and marketing, and then we can, and all that sort of stuff. We're coming up to almost a good period of time. Actually, I think it's probably a good
Time
time to
flies,
wrap.
yeah.
It's because it's almost an hour. But thanks so much for the conversation, Christian. I really appreciate your time here. If anyone does want to get in touch with Christian, I've stuck his LinkedIn on the banner below there. It's Christian Miccio. Feel free. Oh, maybe do you want to just say how do people best contact you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, perfect.
LinkedIn is best. Okay, good.
Yeah,
I'm
LinkedIn is
glad
best.
that's all right.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, LinkedIn is best.
Excellent. And for me as well, if you want to contact me, that's my LinkedIn, and obviously you'll probably be on here anyway. But feel free. And if you're still here, if you're if you're watching this as a replay, you can still post comments and questions. Like, if you're finding this interesting and you have a question that didn't get answered that you'd like to understand more about, whether it's Christian or me, whoever it is, or just someone else who happens to be reading this, post the question anyway, and we'll get to it, and we'll bring it up at some stage in the future, or we'll get back to you and share our thoughts on that kind of thing too. Now, some other people have said things here. Jonathan Kalfa at some stage said nice. Marcus Haffelner said, thank you both. Lots of helpful bits and pieces in your answers. LinkedIn user says, it's intentionally creating silos. Wow. And Christoph says, Dendorf Medosh says, Alan Boyle, I'm also still trying to digest that bit. I guess LinkedIn user is Alan Boyle. I'm sorry if
So
if by doing so, I've revealed a secret name. But
one thing I can to conclude this. I had a situation. We were a very small team. We all knew each other, but our team backend engineer on the team needed focus, and we had exactly that. And at some point, he basically had a go at us and said, "Man, you guys are talking all the time. You're asking me questions. I've got this whole big thing to build, and I need a few hours. Like, give me a few hours." And we didn't know what to say because we're like, well, we're all sitting in the same room. I don't know how we can do that. And so what we came up with in the end was, we put this we just built a paper, right, with like two chopsticks, and the paper had one side that is red, do not talk to me or you die, and the other one
Yeah,
was green. And so when he needed focus, he just turned the paper around, and we all left him alone, right? And so
yeah,
we didn't create a silo, but we gave him the space to think for 2-3 hours without interrupting him. And so
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 important.
it was a funny trick, but it worked.
It's so important. I mean, leaders and managers and product people, that most of their day is interruption driven, and you're always interrupting people. You have a day full of meetings. It's like chopped up like that. And then
This is
engineers
the thing.
and so on take these. You got to have like 4 hours to do the, or 3 hours to get your head into the code or do the
Yeah,
work. And various things are like that. Sometimes finance is like that. Product is often like that because you have to sit down and think about something. Sometimes you got to create those spaces
I
to do the
know,
thinking.
but we're let's be honest, we're the worst offenders, because as soon as we have ideas, we then need to collect data and information from people, and we start pinging
Yeah,
the people left and right. Hey, what about this? Hey, how long would it take us to do that? Hey, how difficult is it to blah? And so we're terrible, right, as well. So I'm trying to be careful how I'm, bombard people with stuff.
it is. Yeah. With one last comment here from William Pipe. Thank you both. Can relate to all the issues discussed. Very useful. Thank you very much. We're going to wrap it up here. Thank you, Christian, again for joining me on this call. It's been really a pleasure to having a chat to you. Always good to work with you and always good to talk to you. I enjoy our
Same,
conversations
it's fun.
anyway. It's good to be able to put this on for other people's benefits and just be able to ask these questions and have some interaction with the audience as well. There will be a recording of this, so it'll be on LinkedIn, it'll be on YouTube, and we'll, and so on. But of course, both Christian and I are available, and all the things we've said have come out of our heads. So if you'd like to talk to us, the stuff is still there. All right.
I've been reading off my notes all the time. What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly. I've got a little AI in the background. No. All right. Thanks very much, Christian, and I'll talk to you soon. Yeah. Take
Thanks,
care.
Richard. Have fun. Have a good day and good weekend, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.